Today on Doomed! The mystery of the secret police tapes that have dogged 2020 Democratic presidential candidate South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Well, maybe a mystery no longer. Today on the show, Jonathan Larsen, managing editor of the Young Turks' TYT Investigates, walks us through the controversy surrounding these elusive tapes and his breaking report, which uncovers what exactly is on them. Folks, my name is Matt Binder, and this is Doomed. As always, you can support this show by going to patreon.com/mattbinder and subscribing to the YouTube channel at doomed.tv and subscribing to iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts at doomedpod.com. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to pull up the cameras here and my guest, Jonathan Larsen of TYT Investigates. How are you doing tonight?
How's it going, man? Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me on this wonderful Thursday night.
You bet.
So, before we jump into your report, because this is a meaty report, you really dove into what this whole thing is about and what people have been sort of rumors and sort of speculation have been going around for way before Pete Buttigieg was even a national figure on the 2020 Democratic primary stage. This has sort of been something that has been in the gossip of South Bend, Indiana. And there's these apparently secret police tapes that have never been released, still haven't been released. And what apparently is the big deal about these tapes? Why have people been talking about them? And how does Pete Buttigieg sort of fall into what these tapes are even about?
So roughly 3 months into Pete Buttigieg's mayoralty, we're talking March 2012 now, he asked his police chief, Darrell Boykins, who was the city's first black police chief, had been in the office for about 4 or 5 years or so. He said, I want you to step down. I want you to resign. And at first, Boykins did resign, and then the black community said, no, that's not going to happen. So Boykins rescinded his resignation, and because the mayor doesn't have the power in South Bend to say, well, you're off the force, what ended up happening was he got demoted. Buttigieg demoted Boykins down to the level of captain. Roughly 11 days later, he also fired a woman named Karen DePape, who was, I believe, the director of communications was her title. That's a civilian office within the South Bend police force. And they were both let go, Buttigieg said at the time, because federal prosecutors said, we've got potential wiretapping violations here, and if you don't remove people, we're going to have to prosecute them. So Buttigieg's position at the time was, I'm saving these people from prosecution by removing them from office. Now, Boykins ended up ultimately filing a lawsuit claiming there was racial animus involved in his demotion, but he has not really spoken publicly about this. Karen DePape, the woman who was fired, very soon, possibly even the same day after she was fired, she spoke with the media, and she said a couple things. She said that there was racist rhetoric used on the tapes and that there was potential police wrongdoing. And then a few months later, she filed a lawsuit for wrongful termination, claiming that she added to her description of what was on these tapes, she saying that the cops discussed a plan to get Buttigieg to get rid of Boykins. Now, since then, it's been a mystery what racial epithets were used, what any of the substance of the details was behind these tapes has been a mystery ever since. And virtually everyone I've just named, plus additional people, have filed lawsuits or been sued. So it's been essentially clamped down, and for 6, 7 years now, roughly, South Bend's, uh, maybe it's too broad to say the entire politics, but certainly the relationship between the police force and the Black community, this has been an unspoken and sometimes a spoken, explicit undercurrent of what exactly was on these tapes. Were police using racist rhetoric? So that's kind of been the mystery these past 6, 7 years, however long it is.
So I sort of just want to frame this in why this is, obviously it's a big deal for the people of South Bend and the state of Indiana, but I want to frame this also as to why this is a big deal nationally, because Pete Buttigieg is a guy who seemingly came out of nowhere. He obviously was a mayor of South Bend. He he ran for the to be DNC chief back after the 2016 elections, when the DNC was shaking things up after the loss to Donald Trump, and the DNC received a lot of blowback from how they sort of handled the primaries and also obviously losing to Trump. And he dropped out before the final vote, sort of gained a little bit of notoriety from that because he seemed like he was sort of this young, upcoming figure in the Democratic Party. And then fast forward to 2019, he throws his hat into the 2020 presidential ring for the Democratic primary. And beginning of the summer, this guy starts to take off. And a lot of talk about Pete Buttigieg being a top-tier candidate. He's since the beginning of the summer, sort of cooled down a bit, and he's dropped back into the high single digits. But still, when people discuss who the top 5 candidates are,
sure,
he's right up there with senators and former vice presidents. This mayor of South Bend, Indiana.
Well, yeah, and he actually, I would say, came to national prominence even before the DNC race by coming out as a gay man, and not just a gay man, but a gay man who was a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, a Rhodes Scholar. Clearly, whatever else you might think of him, you cannot deny the man his resume. So, people might not like it, but he's certainly earned his place on the national stage. Whether that makes him a viable presidential candidate or not, that's up to people to make their own judgments. But what you refer to is kind of what drew my interest in the first place, which was that he hadn't operated on really even a state level, let alone a federal level. And so back in March, I was coming off of some other reporting, and I thought it was about time for me to start looking at presidential candidates, and who among them has not really gotten vetted at a state level, let alone federal. And Buttigieg kind of drew my interest for precisely that reason, because I thought, as the mayor of a small to mid-sized city, he probably has not been vetted to a really sort of rigorous degree. And so that drew my interest. And so this was back in March of this year. I started making some phone calls, and then I went to South Bend in April.
Now, before we get into your report and your on-the-ground experience with uncovering what's on these tapes, which I'm sure the point of listening is to know what's on these tapes, but I'm gonna, I want to add a little bit more flavor to this, because I do think, listen, it's not just because I'm trying to add some sort of drama that's not there. To be honest, when I saw Pete Buttigieg jump into the race, some of the first criticisms I saw from about him were people who were from South Bend, Indiana, floating just really cryptically out there, just wait until the rest of the country finds out about the tapes. Just like that. As if it's something that's just talked about there as, you say the tapes and everyone knows what they're talking about. It's a big deal there. And I think, whether you're a Buttigieg supporter or not, listening to this show, I'm sure that it's mostly not Buttigieg supporters, knowing my fan base, but even if you're if you are a supporter coming across this episode and you want to know more about Pete Buttigieg, I think it's important to know everything about all these candidates' history. And this is a defining moment in a politician's career, how they handle a moment like this. And now let's get to these tapes. Tell us about going down to South Bend and sort of, I guess, where did you where did you look? Like, how did you discover? Because the actual tapes themselves are still eluding us. You haven't listened to the actual tapes, but you have documents, official documentation of what's on these tapes.
Well, so that's what's kind of interesting, at least to me, is that when I first started looking into South Bend and the tapes, it was very clear that the tapes were under lock and key, and no one was going to get to them. And my first thought was, well, okay, but the tapes are of interest because people think they hold the answer to a question. The question being, is there racism on the South Bend police force? And my first thought was, I don't need the tapes to answer that question. If there is racism on the police force, I can find it other ways, right? And so I talked to...
Well, also, the question of is there racism on any police force is pretty much a rhetorical.
to whatever extent that's true,
right.
It still matters to what extent that's true, right? And there was one officer in particular who was kind of the star, or seen as the star of the tapes. And I asked around about him, and I spoke to law enforcement sources, and I spoke to one woman who had been arrested by this guy, and they said, yeah, he's used the N-word, he's used racist rhetoric, and we reported that. And so I sort of thought, okay, I don't need the tapes. And then what ended up happening was, and if you feel the need to like fast forward me to the payoff, do so at any time. But basically, the first thing I discovered was that Buttigieg's campaign finance forms from his first mayoral race, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. Now, that's in accordance with Indiana state law, which says you don't have to retain them past 4 years. So they're gone. And back in April, I asked the Buttigieg campaign, did you keep copies? And if so, may I see them? And I've, to this day, gotten no response. And then over the summer, I was able to obtain one of those filings from the first quarter of 2011, roughly. And one of the names that jumped out at me was an attorney named Rich Hill, who gave Buttigieg $1,000 in the first quarter of 2011. This was March of 2011. This guy gave him $1,000. And the reason that jumped out at me was because 1 year later, this is all public knowledge now, that same attorney, Rich Hill, was the point guy that Buttigieg chose to get rid of Boykins and DePape. And so the fact that this donor 1 year later turned out to be a central figure in removing these people kind of pointed me back to the tapes again. And now I'll get to your payoff. So what I found out was that
wait, actually, before you get to the payoff, not to
yes, let's draw this out, man.
Before you get to the payoff, actually, so it's important to really drive home, I think, why those files from when he ran are so important to what's on these tapes. Now, to truly sort of get why what's on these tapes go back to that, I think we should even get to that before we get to what's on the tapes. It's because there are donors who wanted something from Pete Buttigieg. Apparently.
Which I didn't know at the time.
Right.
Which I found out, apparently. Yeah, so, and people should also understand that I think most people are used to federal standards and federal law in terms of campaign giving. In Indiana, it's very different. It's I don't know if there are limits, but if there are, I don't know what they are. You can write a 5-figure check pretty easily for a mayoral candidate. And as you might imagine, that holds proportionately a hell of a lot more weight than the $2,700 or $2,900 max at the federal level does. So what I ended up finding was that Karen DePape, the woman who had listened to the tapes and got fired for her role in it, back in January of 2012, she actually filed an official report, an internal report with the South Bend Police Department. And so I was able to access that report, and also in response to, related to her wrongful termination suit, the city of South Bend, she sued the city and Pete Buttigieg, mayor thereof, she sued them for wrongful termination. And towards the end of 2013, they sent her a long list of questions saying, what did you hear on this tape? What did you hear on this tape? What did you hear on this one? And why did you think it was worth transferring from the digital computerized phone system onto these cassette tapes that she then gave to the chief? So in other words, maybe no one was talking, but now there are documents. So all I had to do was look at the documents, because she chronicled on those documents in response to the city's questions what is on the tapes. And if you want, if it's okay, I will discuss what we if you're trying to get us past a commercial break or something, I'll play along, but I'm happy to lay it out now too.
All right, I think it's time.
Okay.
So what are on these tapes?
Right. So technically speaking, we don't know what's on the tapes. What we do know is what this woman, Karen DePape, wrote in these documents is on the tapes because she listened to them. And what we hear is there was an officer, a captain, who apparently did not realize after switching lines, after a bunch of promotions happened, he didn't realize that the line he got was one of the lines that was being recorded as a matter of course, right? Lots of police departments record incoming lines. So what she heard over the course of 2011, especially the first half of 2011, was this captain was being briefed by a lieutenant in the county's homicide unit on a plan by the county homicide commander, a guy named Tim Corbett, to use Pete Buttigieg's donors. Remember, this is before Buttigieg is the mayor, so he's in the middle of his campaign. Corbett wants to use Buttigieg's donors to pressure Buttigieg to get Boykins, the first black police chief, out of office. So that's the sort of big piece of it. There's also apparently a racist aspect to this. At one point, one of the officers is quoted saying something like that Corbett said something like, "It's going to be a fun time when all white people are in charge." Black officers are named as the ebonics are used to discuss Boykins, and two other black officers are named in terms of not in positive ways. So, and then in June of 2011, Buttigieg, according to these documents, says Boykins is done. Now, I should make a couple caveats here. Pretty early on in these tapes, the officers say that they believe Buttigieg to be unaware of all of this stuff. So there's no indication on the tapes that Buttigieg knew what racial aspects there might have been to the officers' rationale, or we don't even know whether he agreed with his donors' lobbying, or whether he, for his own reasons, decided that Boykins was done. So there are still a lot of question marks around this.
Right.
But the other thing I want to emphasize about these documents is that Buttigieg has said consistently over the years, I don't know what's on the tapes. And then in his book earlier this year, he says something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, I don't even know if it's legal for me to ask. But according to these documents, his lawyers who are acting on his behalf did ask in 2013 multiple questions about what's on this tape. Why did you think it worth recording? What's on this tape? Why did you think it's worth recording? So, so there are multiple silos to this story, which is why it's if folks make it to the print version, that's why it's so long. I'm sorry, but that's why it's so long.
No, it's a great piece, and I have that linked in both the YouTube description and on the public Patreon page where I post all the shows. Everyone should go and read that full piece to read, because a lot of names. It's to see the print version of it, to see the names and be able to go back and make sure you're following. It was a big help. But at the same time, I think talking about it too will also help add to when people go back and read the full version. Now, the thing that I question, and I don't know if you could answer this at this point, is if when you say the police say that they believe Buttigieg is unaware of this plan. In fact, I believe you even say in your report they knock Buttigieg himself as some sort of like scrawny upstart kid or something like that.
Little effing squirt is the phrase, I believe.
Ah, little effing squirt, scrawny kid. What's that? No,
Yeah,
but that's, they clearly not such a big fan of Buttigieg either.
that's correct.
But then the question is,
And it's not even clear that they're big fans of the donors that they're using in the interim. And I should add, by the way, that the Buttigieg campaign didn't quite deny. They basically insulted me and said something like, "We know that you're willing to print rumors that you can't prove," which, okay, that's kind of journalism in a way. Journalism is not a court of law. We don't prove things, we report
right.
things.
And that's why you use wording such as allegedly, this person
Yeah.
says,
If you want to say that it's not true, go right ahead.
Right.
But they have not said that. The two donors, I did speak to both donors. One of them hung up on me after about 45 seconds, but the other, we had a meaningful conversation, and both of them said this did not happen, or words to that effect. So again, we don't know how true what the cops are saying actually was. Maybe they were getting bad information. But the other point I want to make is that the documents also chronicle conversations that Buttigieg allegedly was having with people other than the donors. There are people who are currently in power in South Bend law enforcement who also were said to be having conversations with Buttigieg in 2011 about who should replace Boykins. And so the reason that's important, I think, is because there's no indication, there's been no public acknowledgement from Buttigieg. Yes, before I was elected, I had substantive conversations with a number of people about why the popular incumbent black police chief of my city's police force should go. That's never been, as far as I'm aware, no one's even asked Buttigieg whether that took place, let alone why. So that's why I think that's a potentially important aspect to all of this.
right. And to me, there's sort of three questions I have here. And, let's go through each of them. Because number one, and again, I don't even know if you can answer these, is, going off what these police say on the tapes, even about Buttigieg, it seems like someone in Buttigieg's position could come out and say, hey, this is what these tapes are. I had nothing to do with it. I abhor what was said and done, and I just didn't know. Why try to act as if you're guilty of something when the signs, according to what we know, are allegedly on these tapes? The signs point to him possibly not knowing.
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question at this point would be speculation, and I can't tell you why he would not say X, Y, or Z. There have certainly been, I think, conflicting explanations for, the rationales as to why people were let go. For instance, there have been questions raised even by local media at the time as to who he was getting advice from. Like I mentioned, that outside counsel at the time, who had strong political connections, had been the city attorney back in the 1980s. So there are lots of circumstances,
Right.
I think, that raise questions. And I think, is it possible that there are answers that are fairly, exculpatory? That's certainly within the realm of possibility. But I also think, this is someone, the mayor, Pete Buttigieg, has been saying for years, I want to know what's on the tapes. And without being too cynical about it, when I told them what was on the tapes, they did not seem too happy to be hearing about it.
Right. Well, maybe it's the first time they've heard it.
In which case, I thought you wanted to know.
Right.
But if it's the first time you're hearing of it, that's the best case scenario. Because if it's not the first time you're hearing of it, well, then you've known.
Right. And also, weird to not, be on the same page as your lawyers, right? I mean, because it seems
Well,
like they knew what this sort of brings me back actually to my second question, and we could include this in here. That woman who lost her job and wrote this and wrote what she heard on these tapes. She she wrote what she heard, and there was this process that was followed, and you would assume that there would be some sort of documentation that would basically refute her version of events if what she heard on the tapes, what she says she heard on the tapes, is inaccurate.
you mean there would be documentation refuting her account of what's on the tapes?
Right. Wouldn't there be some sort, because there was some sort of process that was followed based on what she heard, and then there was this whole process that was followed because she got fired because of her involvement?
Well, at that point, it was a legal process. There doesn't appear ever to have been an internal police process. In other words,
Right.
in theory, some of this stuff could have been referred to internal affairs. Some of this stuff could have been referred to an outside prosecutor. There are a number of avenues that you could certainly take as a matter of protocol, but the documents seem to indicate that whatever she told the chief at whatever point, no action was really taken. What we do know is that the chief discussed the contents of the tapes, I believe in early January 2012, with some of the officers, and that was a big point of contention in the officers' lawsuit. They basically said that the chief was threatening to torch our careers for being disloyal, right? So the first time, essentially the catalyst for all of this becoming a big deal was the officers themselves who were on the tapes or who were discussed on the tapes going to the feds and saying, hey, I've been wiretapped illegally here and my boss is now threatening to use that information against me. And that's roughly the account that Pete Buttigieg has subscribed to over the
Right.
years, both initially and after the fact. But how accurate that account is I would say certainly challenged vigorously by the attorneys for DePape and Boykins, but even from an objective point of view, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence on their side. Both Boykins and DePape's attorneys have said, I may be getting this wrong, some of this may be coming from the documents, so I apologize, but Boykins, I believe, was asked at some point to hold on to the tapes. Generally, you don't ask someone who's accused of theft, hey, hold on to the evidence for me. And and the documents suggest, according to DePape, she's asked at some point, when did you listen to these recordings? And at one point she says, I listened to the recordings at one point at the behest of the federal prosecutors, which again, if you are the subject of a wiretapping investigation, prosecutors typically do not say, hey, go do some more wiretapping.
Right. So, who currently do we know who currently has hold over these tapes?
Yeah, so when you referred earlier to the mayor's attorneys, that's kind of where it gets interesting because the city attorneys seem to have been pretty effectively sidelined in this process. Instead, there was outside counsel brought in. The guy, I think I mentioned him earlier, a guy named Rich Hill, works for a law firm, a powerful Indiana law firm. The actual physical tapes are currently in the custody of the law firm in Chicago.
Wait, hold on. You did say this, but for some reason, just because of how I think, and I think most people think this sort of stuff usually works, I had assumed that the lawyer you mentioned, even if you did mention an outside law firm, it must have just went over my head. I assumed this was a lawyer for the mayor of South Bend, as in the city representative.
It was, but they were outside counsel brought in to augment the existing city attorneys and to, serve as special counsel on this case. Now, here's the thing.
Is that normal?
Well, yes, it actually is.
Okay.
Let me backtrack. It's normal in South Bend. In fact, the same the same outside counsel it turned out back in 1987, it was an issue in the 1987 mayoral race, the fact that he, a former city attorney, was being paid allegedly a lot more to serve as outside counsel. So literally, this scandal had played out in virtually identical form back in 1987. But I just recently got the billing records for the first quarter of 2012, and there's a lot of work that this outside firm is doing for the city at the time. So the fact that the city was relying, and by the way, I should say, was doing work for the city prior to Buttigieg taking office. It's not as if something radical transpired when Buttigieg came into office. They were using this law firm. What's interesting about this particular lawyer being relied on for a federal case involving potential criminal violations is that he didn't have a lot of criminal experience and had no experience in federal law. And I should say, by the way, this was reported by local media at the time. So they were, this is not me coming in and saying, I'm going to make up a controversy here. They were asking questions at the time. That reporter, as it turns out, happened to have moved on, but those questions didn't go away. They might have started hibernating a little bit, but they didn't die.
Right. It's and I want to stress what you just said again. Like I even said earlier, this is not something where, young, upcoming politician gets on the national stage and all of a sudden he's being scrutinized for things that were never an issue. This is literally something that people in South Bend have been talking about as being something that's bad for him, if anything.
Well, not just talking about. I should say the Common Council. That's what the city's legislature is called. The Common Council has been in court for years and is still in court trying to get these tapes, these recordings, unsealed. So the interest in knowing what's on these things is very much still an ongoing thing.
Now, if Pete Buttigieg decided that he wants to hear these tapes, and someone was to tell him that this firm has the tapes, would he have the authority to say, make these tapes public at this point?
It depends who you ask.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Some people say yes, some people say no. So look,
who says yes and who says no?
Well, the Common Council says yes. Lots of people say yes. This is a police department. Of course we're recording your lines.
Right.
There was no malice here because when the lines got switched, the people switching the lines didn't know that line was being recorded, and the people recording the lines didn't know that line got switched. So there is currently a court order sealing some of this stuff, but that's essentially basically a placeholder saying until this gets resolved. But in terms of the legal arguments, there's not really a strong legal argument against this stuff being released. And more to the point, I should say, I did talk to some lawyers, friends of mine, and I said, basically, is there a case where could there be a situation where a lawyer is allowed to have access to evidence, in this case the tapes, but the client, who by the way is also supposed to be able to fully engage in their own defense, but the client would not be allowed to have access to that evidence? And they were like, no, of course not. So the situation now is essentially Buttigieg, I think, can only credibly claim a few things. One, these documents are entirely made up. Okay, if you want to go with that. Yes.
But saying those documents are made up, though, would then refer, if you want to be credible and say they're made up, it would infer that you would have some sort of idea of what's on the actual tapes. Because how can you claim that something is fake when you don't know?
Sure. And actually, a week ago on Friday, in response to a public records request that I filed, the city actually did release a redacted version of the initial police report filed in January of 2012, which has, as you might imagine, big chunks of Sharpie all over them. But everything else matches up nice and with everything that I've got. So there, and again, I did due diligence on these things. I did the best that I could to get people who were broadly familiar with this case, and it turns out that these documents went to lots of different parties. So there's any number of people you can ask, am I nuts in thinking that this is what's on it? But also, I told the Buttigieg campaign at least a week in advance of publication, I said, we're going to be reporting that it says this, this, and this. And they didn't say it's not true.
So sort of the best case scenario here, let's, in terms of the outcome for Buttigieg, if the description of what's on these tapes is true, combined with what actually happened in South Bend when he was mayor, is, from what I understand, and this is the best case scenario for him, is that these cops said these things on these tapes about donors forcing Buttigieg to fire the South Bend's black police chief if he becomes mayor. Buttigieg doesn't know about this. He becomes mayor, finds out about this whole thing with the wiretapping of these police officers, which was accidental, and also, just by same coincidence, also had plans to fire this black police chief of South Bend because of reasons where he just didn't think he was a good police chief that had nothing to do with any sort of deal with his donors or what these seemingly racist police officers felt about the chief.
I think there are probably more favorable scenarios that he could claim as well. But, again, it's all speculative at this point. But these are relatively simple questions, I think, that he just hasn't been asked yet. I mean, most of what he's asked when he is sitting down for a substantive interview tend to be sort of about national and domestic or foreign policy questions, as opposed to, by the way, that job you have, let's talk a little bit about that. So, I would certainly like the opportunity. I've been requesting an interview sporadically since April, as well as, answers to questions like, will you release the campaign finance form? So I don't seem to be first on their list of people they want to have him sit down with. But I hope someone on that list will eventually get around to, because in his book, he says, I interviewed other people for the job. Well, when? Why? What was your thinking? Who were you talking to? Who were you taking counsel from? What were they saying? Who were you not taking counsel from? This is essentially, this was a moment at the beginning of his mayoralty that ended up defining it for a significant number of people. I heard from people in South Bend, people in power, people out of power, and they're pretty unanimous that this reporting is a big deal. And that's the G-rated version of what I'm hearing.
So what is Buttigieg, has he ever really been pressed as to the like a real definitive reason as to why he would fire this police chief, on top of the fact that, knowing what we know, and I'm assuming even if we didn't know what we knew then, I'm assuming there were still these rumors that he had to been aware of. Why even do it from a political or media standpoint? Just like a bad look.
Yeah. And he says so in his book. He says, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says that Boykins was a popular chief, and that it was, he doesn't use the word traumatic, but it was a painful event for the black community. And the other thing I should say is he also writes in his book at some length about the notion, he sort of floats the notion that the prosecutor, this is the federal, United States Attorney's Office for Northern Indiana. He says that he suggests the prosecutor wanted Boykins out of there and essentially manipulated a young, naive mayor into doing his dirty work for him by getting rid of a popular black chief, which is sort of at odds with the notion that Buttigieg himself has said, which he's given a number of versions. One, I was saving them from prosecution, but also he said, he has said that Boykins didn't tell him quickly enough that there was an investigation, and there are some fair questions I think you could raise about what's quickly enough and what do you actually mean by that. And he's also said that he had a line to the effect of, if you're the subject of a federal investigation, you cannot occupy a leadership position in my administration, which is a little bit of presumed guilty. But also, we actually uncovered a situation where a later white police chief was the subject of a state police investigation, which we reported. There was a secret state police report on that white chief, and Buttigieg saw that report and made public comments about the report, which were not borne out by the report, because we obtained. I was leaked anonymously a portion of the report, which definitely did not exonerate that white police chief. So the idea that a black police chief who was ultimately cleared by federal prosecutors had to go, but a white police chief in the fashion that Buttigieg said by the state police could stay and enjoy Buttigieg's support, again, might be entirely okay, but we don't know that because no one's really sat down and said, let's walk through this. Get out your calendar. Let's start talking about what happened on what date.
So what happened to all these people involved? So what was these two police officers that were on this tape talking about this plot to take down the police chief? Where are these two guys at?
So the honest answer is I don't remember the precise answers off the top of my head. I believe they both moved up within law enforcement in South Bend.
Well, of course.
I believe one of them has since retired and one of them may be in charge of the county drug unit. It's also a little complicated because the county actually has units that do police work that might typically be done by a city police unit. So the city and its suburbs all kind of feed people into some of these county units, like homicide, which was involved in the tapes, but there's also a drug unit as well. And so basically these people moved up. And one of the people that Buttigieg was talking to in 2012 about, hey, who should move up to which position, that person, I believe, was looking to become chief of the uniform division and did become chief of the uniform division and is the current chief of police in South Bend.
So what happened to the woman who wrote this, what was on the tapes? I'm sorry, what was her role again when she was listening to the tapes? It was early on. I can't remember. So many names.
Welcome to the rabbit hole, man.
Yeah, I know.
So her job was, if I have the title correctly, was director of communications, which was very literal. It's like the lines coming in and
for the South Bend Police.
For the South, she was a civilian employee of the South Bend Police Department. And essentially, there was a malfunction with the recording device. These incoming lines are supposed to be recorded automatically. She gets, I'm making this up, but she gets a blinking light. So she's got to now reboot the thing, hit Control-Alt-Delete, and then listen to all the lines and make sure that they're all being recorded as they're supposed to be. And because I mentioned earlier, one of the lines was now in possession of a different person, she writes in these documents, she's like, I continued to listen because I didn't know whether there was a malfunction because I was hearing someone's voice who I didn't think belonged on the line. So she listens long enough to start hearing things where she thinks, okay, now I've really got to start listening. And then she brings it to the chief who doesn't do anything. This is, I think, February 2011. And she drops it. Then in July, she's asked to listen to the line again. Why is she asked? Because it turns out the city attorneys routinely ask her to listen to the lines. They know she listens to them. This is a standard thing that they do for litigation, for public records, anytime you file a public records request for communications regarding blah, blah, blah. They tell this woman, Karen DePape, I think I'm pronouncing it right. That's how all the local people pronounce it. And so she writes in these documents, these city attorneys of yours, they've been asking me for years to do this thing that you are now suddenly claiming you think is a federal violation. So the idea that the city attorneys never told Buttigieg, actually, Mr. New Mayor, we do this all the time.
Right.
The idea that they didn't mention that to him is a lot more plausible if they were totally sidelined and he was only taking counsel from this outside counsel who had these deep political connections to the donors, to the people jockeying for power.
And so, has the former police chief, has he ever come out and said anything, or did he sort of have some sort? I guess there was a lawsuit with with South Bend, I assume, and I'm gonna guess he hasn't, and there was some sort of settlement, but.
Everyone has signed settlements, and virtually all of these settlements come along with, you know, not exactly gag orders, but shut your face orders.
Right.
You know, that's part of the agreement is we're done talking about this. Let's move on.
Right. So, this show normally covers these sort of, usually it's on the right, political controversies and conspiracy theories. But, this one to me is extraordinary in a way that it seems pretty easy for this not to be a big deal. And then it just sort of turned into this really big deal that effectively, in my opinion, speaks to something broader. And it's what happened recently with the local Black Lives Matter chapter in South Bend and Mayor Pete, where there was a police shooting. And
you're talking about the death of Eric Logan.
Yes. And it seems like there's something going on here. That, listen, I don't know what Pete's deal is with any of with in terms of how he's being a mayor or how he's dealing with these race issues. It could literally just be a failure of leadership. We don't know. But to me, it shows a lack of ability. Like, what is he doing on this national stage when there's problems at home as the mayor of South Bend, Indiana? He apparently met with the local Black Lives Matter group, and they came out afterwards and said it seemed like he just didn't want to be there, and it was just something he was, that's their opinion. Can't really know what really happened. But from their view of things, it just seemed like just another issue with Pete Buttigieg when it comes to issues with the black community in South Bend.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't sort of speak to the guy's sincerity in terms of trying to address these things. I do know, and no candidate is perfect. And my own personal pet peeve is the desire to have a flawless messiah of a presidential candidate. My own personal view is, grow the hell up. We're all, if you're old enough to vote, you're old enough to have screwed up at some point, and don't expect your people to be perfect. But that said, I think certainly there are. I'll tell you my own pet theory about Buttigieg in this case. He did not come up within South Bend politics, right? He went to Harvard. He made friends and associates at the Institute of Politics there. He worked at McKinsey, the consulting firm. He made friends and political connections there. He didn't have a deep base of political support of his own within South Bend. He had some connections. And when he ran for state office in the year prior, he ran for state treasurer and impressed a lot of people, Democrats, with how well he did on the state level. It's a red state, and he ran a good race. But that meant that the people whose attention he attracted for his mayoral race 1 year later were old school people. There was former governor and former South Bend mayor Joe Kernan. There was Mayor Roger Parent, who had been mayor back in the 70s. These were people who were at Buttigieg's back. And it seems to me that it's entirely natural and intuitive to think that when he first was putting together what his administration would look like, he didn't have, I wouldn't think, a lot of his own experience with who are the players, who who should I not be listening to and who should I be listening to? And the people who were spending, five figures to put him in office, why wouldn't he listen to these people who had shown a lot of faith in him and whose judgment he probably trusted? So therefore, you see him getting rid of Boykins, who was disliked by white officers who had a lot of political connections. He brings in so Buttigieg writes in his book that the police department suffered from a lot of like cliquishness and political connections. Who does he replace Boykins with? A former police chief from back in the 1980s. Literally, he brings back a South Bend police chief from the 1980s who's connected to all these guys. He's there as of March 31st or April 1st. So then, and by the way, also at the end of 2011, the only two people he interviews besides Boykins are people within the department, politically connected people. So in that first half of his mayoralty, first half of the first year of his mayoralty, he's basically in the pool, right? He's working within the pool that he's got. It's only a couple years later when he goes now to get a permanent replacement for the police chief. Now he does a nationwide search, which feels a lot more like a big data McKinsey recruiting kind of endeavor. So that playing amateur psychologist from afar, that feels to me like someone who thinks, screw you guys, I'm going to what I know. I'm not taking your counsel anymore. I'm not pulling from the local pool. I'm gonna get someone far the hell away from this mess. Of course, that police chief ended up blowing up in his face too, and now the guy he's got in the position at the moment is actually a player back from all of this tape stuff.
So, Jonathan, what's next in this case of the Pete tapes?
So there are a couple answers to that. The case is still in court because the Common Council wants the tapes out, and the cops who are on it do not want the tapes out. So that's literally being fought in court. I believe there's supposed to be a hearing this month, but supposedly a trial, it wouldn't even go to trial until next summer. So legally, a lot of this stuff is still going on. Politically, what's next with the tapes basically depends on whether or not Buttigieg is sort of asked about this stuff, whether he's ever in a forum with someone that they feel compelled to respond to. Because they didn't answer me when I asked them, here are the quotes we've got. What have you got to say about it? They just sort of brushed us off as, you're not credible. Well, maybe I'm not, but how about the stuff I'm saying? So if someone gets a mic in their face and gets an answer, then maybe we get to find out a little bit more.
Jonathan Larsen, managing editor of TYT Investigates. Your work on this has been great. I implore everyone to go read it. Again, the links are in my on the YouTube description page and on my Patreon page. There's so much more to this story you can read in this report, and seems like you're staying on this. So I look forward to eventually hearing these tapes. I'm sure they'll be out one day.
We will see, right? We will see.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Hope to have you on again in the near future.
Thanks a lot, Matt. It was great. Thank you.
Take care. All right, ladies and gentlemen. As always, you can support this show by going to patreon.com/MattBinder. Go to doomedpod.com to listen to the audio show and get all the links to iTunes, Google Play. Leave a review on iTunes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at doomed.tv. What else can you do? Oh, if you're watching the YouTube channel right now, you can give a one-off donation by just throwing over a super chat. And I will read your super chat comment first thing. We will now go into, folks, we're really close to hitting the goal, the first goal I have on this Patreon page. It's the closest we've ever been. We're about 24 patrons away from the next step of this show. And the people who've been supporting this show, whether from day one or just this past month. I cannot thank them enough because that's why we are where we are right now. That's, wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for these people who support the show. And these people, the active members of the Patreon are Abigail T, Adam Q, Alan B, Andrew H, R.E.R, Benji, Bobby M, BZ, Champagne Kame, Chi, Christina H, Colin R, Dakota R, excuse me, Dan K, Dan M, The Dans, Dank Uger, Dave K, David Z, David P, The Daves, Dragon Slayer, Eugene B, Fraz K, FTW All Day, Greg D, Grimlock, Ian Curtis J, Jameson Test, Janelle A, Jasmine H, Jeff K, Jeremy M, John S, Jonathan B, Jonathan L, Joseph R, Joyce M, Justin M, Justin S, the Justins, Katie S, Katz, Kaushal, Larry G, Lisa D, Lisa H, the Lisas, Machine Gun Etiquette, I think that's what it is, right? Yeah. Max W, User Me, Melissa M, Michael B, Michael J, Michael M, the Michaels, Mr. Danks, Nicole A, Nam Daynet, Noel Style, O Death, Romina O, Ryan Left His Best, Scott R, Sean H, Stephen S, Struggle Session, Swizzle M, TM, Tamney G, Thaddeus A, Tina M, Tom G, Tom M, Why That Tie Guy, Will P, Utopian, and Zarin. Folks, like I said, the numbers are getting up there. And sooner or later, I will not be able to shout out everybody. So get in while you still can. Because A, you will be guaranteed for me to shout you out, because I'm going to shout out all these people till we get to 100. And on top of that, I'm going to make sure that the people who've been there since these early days are part of a special tier when we get to this new stage in the Patreon and the show. You guys are the early adopters, to use tech jargon. Folks, this was sort of a niche episode, but at the same time sort of not, because we were talking about like the 5th place person in the 2020 Democratic primary of like 20 people. This is a guy who was rising in the polls. I still don't think he's done. I'm sure he's going to have at least one more big moment, if not more than that. I think he's a major figure to contend with in the Democratic primaries. And this is a conspiracy, a controversy that has followed him around for years. And it really has been undercovered until, like you just heard Jonathan was saying himself when he spoke to even local people on the ground there. This is a big story for the people of South Bend. And in essence, because of Pete's role right now, it should be a big story nationally. I mean, again, he's not nailed and no one's got him. He hasn't been caught red-handed. But there's certainly something here that's worth questioning. Who knows? Maybe this reporting will prove once and for all that these tapes do not implicate Pete in anything, and they were just acting the way they were acting because, I don't know, they were just worried politically that even the discussion of the tapes would be bad for them. That's a possibility. We just don't know. And the way everything is playing out, it's certainly something to look into. And I'm glad we looked into it on this show with Jonathan of TYT Investigates. There's a few big stories today I wanted to talk about, but we got to go to the members half, the patron only half. So let me give a quick summary of at least one of them. So one of the big stories this week has been the Working Families Party, endorsing Elizabeth Warren over Bernie Sanders. It's a big deal. They endorsed Bernie in 2016, and now they're endorsing Warren, even though Bernie's still in the race. And there was a big controversy over how they endorsed the process of endorsement. Basically, there was a leadership vote and then a membership vote. And then the final tally is a weighted vote, where the leadership vote of 50 some odd people counts for 50% of the vote, and the membership and people who are signed up on their newsletter vote, which apparently counts to about 10,000 votes or 20,000 votes, counts for 50% of the vote. So the big deal, the big controversy is that they won't release the vote totals for each half. They won't break out the vote totals of the membership on their own and the vote totals of the leadership on their own. And the assumption from a lot of people is that, why wouldn't they do this? It's a great way to be transparent. They're a progressive organization. Addendum, full disclosure, I support Working Families Party. I have voted on the Working Families Party line pretty much every time. I mean, there's a few, I don't remember if they ended up getting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on their party line. I think they did. And I don't know if they got Cynthia Nixon off their part. Can't remember. But basically, they endorsed Joe Crowley over, this is the New York chapter of Working Families Party. They endorsed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, They endorsed Joe Crowley over Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last year. They endorsed Andrew Cuomo over Zephyr Teachout in the 2014 governor's race. I disagree with those endorsements. I disagreed with them at this time. I don't always agree with Working Families Party. I fry on everything. But that being said, I support the party. They're probably the most progressive party that actually has a line on the ballot. Another addendum here. There are, without a doubt, even more progressive organizations than Working Families Party now. But again, that aside, they are an organization I support. Which is why I understand and agree with why people who support Bernie Sanders are so upset. Just release the vote totals of each side so people know how it broke down. The fact that they did so in 2015 when they endorsed Bernie Sanders is proof that they can do it and that they've done it before. So, I mean, I don't understand what the big deal is. Why? I mean, I also really don't get people who are acting like it's conspiratorial to ask for that. I mean, they don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. It's their prerogative not to do it. No one is saying they're forced to do it. They don't have to do it. But it certainly hurts their bona fides as a transparent, progressive organization. I'm not saying I'm never going to support them again. I'll probably vote on Working Families Party line in the next race. But it's certainly a disappointment, and it makes you think when they roll out endorsements, how to line up with who they're endorsing. You have to question that now. Just be transparent, and it's completely cool. We could get more into that in the second half of the show. And folks, I think I ran through everything that you need to know. Stick around if you're watching live. Patrons, you'll be able to listen to this on the podcast that's uploaded to Patreon. Otherwise, see you all next time on Doomed. Let me clear my throat. Okay. Excuse me. Had a little something in my throat. All right, I think people still want to talk about this WFP thing, because it's been, the Bernie bros. Want to talk about it. Um, there's been some new information actually that Matt Brunig pointed out. Let me get to this. All right, so Daniel Marins at the Huffington Post spoke with some leaders of Working Families Party and sort of dived into the situation here. And all the leaders he spoke to, I think there's about 6 or 7 of them, maybe even a few more, 8, 9. They all pretty much confirmed they voted for Warren. So if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. I disagree wholeheartedly that a party that calls themselves the Working Families Party would not endorse the candidate of working families. There's political calculations here, I'm sure. There's strictly personal biases that we've seen all over the place against Bernie Sanders when it comes to establishment organizations. And listen, people are going to go, oh, you're calling Working Families Party the establishment. No. I'm not calling Working Families Party part of the establishment. But as an organization, and I've brought this up 100 times on this show as to why I'm not even a paying dues member of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, even though I wholeheartedly support DSA probably more than any other organization, progressive organization of the sort, and consider myself to be a democratic socialist. Hell, I consider myself to be a full-on socialist. I'll get to that more in a second, but some of the leaders in this piece, the Huffington Post piece, have admitted that the reason they voted for Warren, among other reasons, but one major one, is that they think she can bring together the left and the center. Well, first of all, that's really disturbing to hear from leaders of a progressive organization. The political calculation there is not good. What is the center, by the way, to a progressive organization? I want to know what they consider the center. We sort of really irked me reading that quote, but it shows that even these progressive organizations like that, like Working Families, are entrenched in the process. The decorum, the civility politics of the Democratic Party. I mean, it's the same when Bernie said Planned Parenthood is part of the establishment. Did he mean Planned Parenthood is supported by like big government and there's an overseeing force that there's the military industrial complex and the Planned Parenthood complex? No. Obviously, in the scheme of things, Planned Parenthood and women's rights activists have to fight for the services that Planned Parenthood provides and the rights and needs that they serve. That's not what he was saying. He was saying the political calculations that even an organization like Planned Parenthood have to make. Oh, do I support this candidate even though they might line up more with me? Or do I support the party favorite so I don't have to worry about losing those connections that will cost my organization donations and money that keep our business or nonprofit organization going? I mean, that's the deal here. And I don't know what the Working Family, I'm not saying that's what the Working Family Party is doing, but just their strategy of looking at it is clearly not coming at it as a traditional progressive organization would do so. It really did stun me to hear them say that, to be quite honest. Or one party leader say that, to be honest. Anyway, let me get to what I usually bring up. I have a distrust of any sort of political organization in that sense. I am a registered Democrat of the Democratic Party because I want to vote in the primaries. I don't technically, I'm not a supporter of the Democratic Party. However, most of the politicians I support, the actual progressive and leftist politicians, are Democrats. So that's why I want to vote in the Democratic primary, to make sure that those people continue to win their races or push out the Democrats I don't support. Because we're in a two-party system. Third parties are just not viable in the way our politics works. So I have always sort of distrusted these sort of organizations. And it's because there's this bizarre thing that so many, and DSA does the same thing, but they're transparent about it, and that's the difference there. But that's also why I don't really, maybe I'll become a DSA member eventually. But it's why I sort of don't want to get involved in that sense. You know, if I was a politician and was running, I would absolutely want to get their endorsement because our politics completely lines up. I'm talking about the inter-organization politics. For example, one of the biggest things, and I loved Occupy Wall Street because of the idea that there were no leaders. It was a movement where everyone's voice would come together in unison for the tenets of what the movement was about, but then everyone still spoke for themselves, for the most part. But then, and it ended up really killing Occupy, there was the at work you would call this like the corporate politics of it all in a workplace. People would show up at general assemblies in their specific work groups, their specific groups, and people would want to try to take over certain aspects. People would want to be the face of direct actions. There would be fights over who was the face of this and who was gonna win over as the person with the best idea and who would get the credit for it. And it just became this circle jerk, really, of like activism celebrity, really. And it actually happens a lot of times on both, in any sort of political movement. You see it on the right with people like Jacob Wall, people who just treat it. I mean, we know on this show that people on the right, the major figures of the right, are grifters for the most part. They all use it as a way to personally enrich themselves. And the left is in the broad left, not leftists. People to the left of Republicans, liberals, Democrats, progressives, leftists. We're supposed to be for the policies and for bettering people. But human nature kicks in, and certain people still end up looking out just for themselves. And that's what ends up happening. I don't want to waste time on these inter-corporate, inter-organization politics. I don't care for it. I don't care who gets credit for what. I don't get who's the loudest at the meetings. It's just bullshit, man. It's just, I hate it. There's no bigger turnoff to me than that. And that's why I hate how these votes happen. Listen, again, they are who they are. They're an organization that has no reason whatsoever to do anything any way other than how the leaders of the organization want. It's their freedom. It's their right to do that. But man, for a leftist, progressive group to be like that, it's disappointing. Why have a vote like that? The leadership, we could debate the merits of having leaders or not in an organization. We could see how it worked for Occupy. We could see how it didn't work for Occupy. We can see how it works for groups like the DSA and Working Families Party. We can see how it doesn't work for groups like DSA and Working Families Party. That aside, though, when it comes to an endorsement vote, what is the argument for someone having more say? What's the argument for 50 some odd people's vote to equal 170 something of the members' votes? it's pretty gross. I don't agree with it. Again, it's their right to do it, but man, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't. I'm not going to vote in any Working Families Party endorsements in the future. Why? I'm not a percentage of whoever those leaders are. Listen, you want to say that they have a right to, they do the work? I mean, yeah, they do the work. They also get paid for doing the work. I mean, I don't expect anything. Activists who volunteer and spend their time and don't get paid knocking on doors and fighting for what they believe in, they do the work and they don't get paid and they don't have any extra say. I mean, come on. I mean, you get paid for doing this? Good, great. I've gotten paid for doing political work. There's nothing wrong with that. But I also wouldn't have said that my voice was more important than anybody else's. I mean, you have expertise to bring. You use that, and people will, on their own, value your opinion more. And you could have made, these leaders could have said, hey, I support this candidate for this reason. Here's my work. This is why I'm supporting this candidate. And I'm backing it up with my long history as an activist. And I'm sure you would have swayed people. No need for your vote to matter more than theirs. I mean, and so let's get to this thing Matt Bruneck points out. So there's this article that I mentioned in Huffington Post. And I don't even think Matt Bruneck realized when he quoted this, because he didn't say it in his tweet, but it's part of the clip of the piece that he cut out for his tweet. The WFP says it is refusing to release the figures because to do so would create an artificial division in the status of different voters, when all the votes cast are equally legitimate. Bruneck points out that, equally legitimate is a weird way to describe votes that are worth 178 times other votes. But fine. That's not, to me, the standout part. In some cases, Huffington Post writes, the distinctions might be hazy anyway. Wait, what would be hazy about taking the 50% vote of the leaders and the 50% vote of the members, splitting those up, and saying how much how those leaders voted, and then how the members voted? What would be hazy about that? Let me continue. Schwartz, Zucker, and I'm not even going to name these people because it doesn't matter. These party leaders all voted in the online general membership ballot in addition to casting their state committee votes. I did a double take when reading this. And I don't know if you haven't seen my tweet yet, I don't think anyone's noticed this before I tweeted it. What this is saying is that those party leaders of the WFP whose one vote counted the same as 178 member votes, they also voted in the membership vote. So they got their vote as one of the 50 some odd leaders in the 50% part of the weighted vote. And then they also got their say as the one vote in the 50% vote in the membership side. They literally voted twice. Are you kidding me? It's incredible. How do you think that even looks like? Even if you want to argue, it doesn't matter. Even if you end up rolling this shit out and it doesn't matter. How does that look good? Letting people who are part of the party not only vote in a vote that makes them matter more, they get to vote in that other percentage too. They double dipped the votes. They double dipped. Like, I'm honestly, I'm not even outraged. Like, what you're hearing right now is just, honestly, I can't believe it. I'm laughing. I'm laughing about it. I read it and I started to laugh. It's hilarious to me. I don't know what else to say. Oh my God, it's something else, man. It's something else. Listen, again, I think the WFP does good work, but no one is above criticism, man. Nobody's perfect. And let's add this in right away because it should go without saying. And anyone who knows my body of work for literally the past decade knows where I stand on online harassment and racism and sexism. Because apparently there have been agitators online who have been saying horrific things to the leadership of the WFP. And I shouldn't even have to. Along with, they demanded that other people and groups did. They wanted Bernie Sanders to, there was a letter signed by a number of major figures in the WFP and in various groups. I think it was, Black Lives Matter groups, racial justice organizations. And listen, I respect those groups and those individuals and the work they do tremendously. But, I mean, it should go without saying. And it's unfortunate they feel like they need to ask. So let me say it, because, like I said, if you know my body of work, you know where I stand on this. It is disgusting. I abhor it. If you are someone who's done this, you should be ashamed of yourself. You do not share my ideals. You do not share the ideals of the people who you claim to support and the movements and policies you claim to support. There's no place for you on the left. Period. End of discussion. And I mean end of discussion because there is no but here. That's where I stand on online harassment. End of story. My issue is that it went a little further, these complaints about this. Because no one ever really looks into who is doing the harassment. And, I mean, it matters. Because we know that there are movements, both foreign and domestic, that seek to cause dissent online within the American political discourse. And we know from Russian trolls to racist 4chan shitposters will latch onto this stuff and try to divide Democrats, progressives, the left, period. And I'm not someone who feels the need to say that, show us you're being harassed. Listen, I'll believe you. No problem. I believe you. I respect you, I respect you, so I believe you. But I looked into some of these claims. And the private claims I can't speak to. As far as those are concerned, again, I believe you. Horrific. But the public ones I've seen that are specifically mentioned in this letter, I looked into them. These aren't accounts in any sense of the word that are run by people who are in any way representative of anyone, really. One of the accounts who said something racist, first of all, is an anonymous account with like 100 some odd followers who I went through years of this person's history, and they claimed to be a black person. Now, harassment's wrong no matter what, but these claims were specifically about racist white people who support Bernie Sanders. But that doesn't seem to be the case from what I've seen. Like, you can't know the race of these people unless they're tweeting with their pictures. And if they are tweeting with their pictures, I'm not asking for you to provide proof they harassed you. I'm asking for you to call them out so we could get these people the fuck out of here. we should publicly shame these individuals. So please, let's put them on blast. You don't get to even offer proof. I believe you. I want these people on blast. Because from what I've seen, there's no one to really apologize for. Because they're just bullshit accounts that are meant to stir up trouble. I want to know who these real people are because I don't want them part of our movement. I want them gone from the left. So, I mean, the calculation here, to be honest with you, is that yes, this shit is horrific, and yes, the harassment's real. But the way this is being framed is a political move, without a doubt. There was a phrase specifically that really irked me. Something like, it was a white terror on the left is as bad as on the right or something like that in this open letter. Listen, I've been covering the internet harassment movement on the right, the fucking 4chan, 8chan shit, the white supremacist movement, the growing neo-Nazi threat, probably more than 99% of people who cover this, who cover anything. There are a number of people who are experts in this. Many of them I've had on this show, who I would put, obviously, in that category with me. Many of them even above me, obviously. That's why I have them on the show as experts. But I've been covering this shit. And yes, there is racism on the left. There's racism everywhere. There are Bernie Sanders supporters who are racist. There are Elizabeth Warren supporters who are racist. There are Kamala Harris supporters that are racist. There are Joe Biden supporters that are racist. There are people who voted for Trump that are racist, goes without saying. There are people who voted for Obama who are racist. There are people who voted for Hillary Clinton who are racist. Racists are within the base of every politician because there is a large portion of this country who are racist. And an even larger number who, if not outright categorically are racist, have said or believed racist things and said or felt racist thoughts, which puts them to me in the racist category. But I do think some of those people can be educated and, you know, it's not in their heart. They're just ignorant. But white terror on the left, like on the right, the conflation there is really, really irks me. Really irks me. Because what you're doing is you're giving so much ammunition to those bad faith arguments that literal fascists use to downplay and attack the people who put their bodies on the line for anti-fascist and anti-racist action. There is white racism on the left. There's no white terror on the left like there is on the right. Fuck, you might as well just fucking give the FBI and the CIA exactly what they want when they look into calling Antifa racist, or when they look into Black Lives Matter groups as, looking at Antifa as a terrorist organization and looking into Black Lives Matter groups as some sort of terroristic threat. Literally. That's why that happens. There is no, it's a problem. We got a problem here. If they're gonna go back to that shit for this election, for the candidate that has the most white support in defense of the candidate who has the most white support. The rules of 2016 have changed. Bernie Sanders now has the multiracial coalition. The candidate they endorsed, Elizabeth Warren, WP endorsed Elizabeth Warren, is right now the candidate of white people. Poll after poll bears that out. And this is where we're going to go. You can pen an open call to unite against racism, sexism, and harassment without the political hit involved. I mean, otherwise it's just a campaign move. And it's abhorrent to bring that really unbelievable to it's unfortunate to see that, to be honest. Should honestly And then the other thing I saw where a few of the Working Family Party leaders were saying that this whole blowback from Bernie supporters who want the transparent vote totals separated, that it has to do with them being the two of these leaders being black. I haven't seen that. I have not seen that. Why do that? Why do that? It has nothing to do with that. It really doesn't. I don't know, like, it's what is that shit, man? Like, come on. And that's why I'm not gonna play these games, man. I'm not gonna play these fucking bullshit fucking political games here, man. I'm not here to give myself or anyone a pat on the back, saying, there's no Bernie supporter who deserves anything from you. And there's no one in any organization that deserves to not be criticized. Period. I mean, it's just bullshit, man. I'm here to make to advocate making people's lives better. I'm here for the policies. I'm here to grow a movement. I'm here because I'm not playing around. Lives depend on it. I mean, we have fun doing it, and that's how we're able to do it. Like on this show, to me, it's a fun show. This is an entertainment show, in addition to being a political show. And that's how we get through, That's how we stay sane when this sort of shit happens. Fucking racism and sexism and harassment, gross. The fucking bad faith politicizing of identity politics, gross. Like, it's just unnecessary, man. Alright, I went on for a while with that. I just had to get that off my chest, I had to get that off my chest. Let's go to the YouTube comments. Dorian says doomed. Grimlock says TYT time. All right. Yes, we had TYT on the show today. My pops, disheartened when MR tweeted out yesterday seeking recommendations for leftist best podcasts. No mention of doomed until Piccolo tweeted Matt, the Tiffany Trump of the Majority Report podcast family. Grimlock says, yeah, that was sad, Alan. It's all right. It's all right. I get it. I'm the Tiffany Trump. It did give us that moment where I'm the Tiffany Trump. I loved it. I retweeted that one. Ryan says, glib sociopath Alfred E. Newman couldn't even do corruption right as the mayor of a small Indiana town. Sad. Bye-bye, Mayor Pete. You're very nasty. Champagne Commie says, Legion of Doom, assemble. Robert Douche says, Mayor Pete is dismissed. Robert Douche. Good name. Lars says, going down to South Bend, gonna have myself a time. Very good. Grimm says, policing was built off the antebellum slave patrols. All cops are racists. Less True Detective, more Herzog and Grizzly Man listening to the Bear Guy's death screams. Brian says that Buttigieg isn't asked about this at every debate is BS. Right. Dorian says you can't prove it is usually a tacit admission of guilt. Grim says, survey says the jury is in on Buttigieg. Alan says, booty getting served. Patrick says, one person is going to stream your report, Jonathan, but I support your report and not how others or pundits believe it should be. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Hello, Misha. Hello, Kennedy. Hello, Renee. Saying hi to some of the usuals who are jumping in the chat here. Let me make sure there wasn't any. Was there any super chats? I guess I missed them. No, I don't see any. No super chats today. Woe is me. Oh, gotta go back to the. Renee says Sam Cedar's missing out on all the legalese. The alum surpasses the master. Congrats, Papa Bender. Indie voter on Periscope didn't like the episode today. This is boring as shit, man. Sorry, not everything is gonna be, not everything's gonna be for everybody. I hate to say it, Just how this works. Sorry. Kennedy defends me. Says this is it's not boring, it's niche. Alright, well. Listen. I found it fascinating, and I think it's... Listen, I'll guarantee you that this is going to be one of those things that when the primaries roll around, because Pete Buttigieg is going to be in for the primaries, I'll guarantee you that. He's up there. How far he gets is up in the air, but he will be there in the primaries. He's not dropping out before people vote. I'll guarantee you that. This will be one of those stories that you guys will go back and go, the big story will break, and you guys are going to go, holy shit, I heard this on Doomed. Matt Binder had a guest that dived deep into this months before anyone else was on top of this. Well, anyone else other than the reporter who and the TYT reporter and the local reporters have been covering it, but on a nationwide scale. I guarantee you. I had a great review from someone, and I don't read iTunes reviews. I should probably read this on the show. I should probably literally take out Facebook and Twitter and YouTube ads with this review, because it really one of my favorite reviews I've received on iTunes. Matt has interviewed David Karp about the Bret Stephens bedbug situation. Journalist Brock Wilbur about, oh my God, I can't remember how to say it. That sex cult. Nexium, I think it was, right? And its media watchdog front, the Knife Media. And future Kent State gun girl Caitlin Bennett about the Turning Point USA diaper scandal months before she gained more widespread infamy. Doomed is living in 3008. I mean, if there's one thing I'm proud of this show, it's that I think I'm on top of this shit before anybody else. Well, again, in terms of podcasts, streams, obviously I'm not scooping the guest I'm having on who reported on this stuff. But not always reporters. Sometimes I have the person involved in the story themselves. In the case of David Karp and with Bret Stephens and Kent State gun girl Caitlin Bennett. Midnight Pizza Man with the first super chat of the show. Maybe the last super chat of the show as well. Matt Binder is all elite. Thank you. Thank you. And if you're making a reference to what I think you're making, allow me to make another reference. Sounds dynamite. Someone said P-tape is real? ? Well, that's what I was getting at in my title. The Pete tape is real. I put Buttigieg because for SEO purposes, but I'm getting at the Pete tape is real. Grim says, good thing Pete will never be president, eh, Ryan? And Ryan says, don't know, Grim. They're sure trying to make Pete happen. Politics Understander. Warren and Sanders have very little overlap. Warren only gets college-educated whites. Bernie has everyone else. Well, not only, but that's the majority, is what you mean. Like, Warren does have some sort of... There is at least one Latino and one black person who supports Elizabeth Warren. So it's not only, but I know what you're saying. Yes. The demographics are clear as day right now. Warren's base is college-educated white people. Bougie white liberals. I mean, their donor base. I saw today the donor base. Bernie's donors, teachers, truck drivers, workers at Walmart and Target, waiters, waitresses, blue-collar labor jobs. Elizabeth Warren's base. Psychologists, donor base, I should say. Psychologists, professors, which I want to reiterate, professors, not teachers. Teachers are with Bernie. Professors are with Warren. Professors, psychologists, scientists, librarians. I mean, there's a distinct, you can just tell by the career choices. I'm not I like Warren again. I'm not demonizing her, but you could see in where they went in their career how this plays out, how this is being separated. I mean, listen, those people, scientists, lawyers is Biden. Makes sense. Scientists, psychologists, professors, good people, obviously. Librarians, great people. But you can see where the split is. I mean, seems very clear. Kennedy says Bad Praxis has almost 15 Patreon supporters. Good for you guys. Congratulations. Great show. If you guys want to come back on here, I welcome you. I believe one of you already donates to the Patreon. That means only 2 more of you need to do so as well, and you're back on the show. For people who aren't familiar, I had the whole Bad Praxis squad, Kennedy's podcast, on an episode of Doomed. Great episode. Great guys and gal. And my jokingly half serious invite for them to come on again requires them to become patrons of the show. I think Chi is a patron, right? Chi, you come on the show as a member of Bad Praxis. But Kennedy and oh god, I'm having a mental block. Sorry. I will respectfully refer to him as what's his face. You need to open up that wallet. Grim referring to the early adopters as the Doomed Founders Pack. I like that. Philadelphia fan says, I wish every interview they ever do with Pete, they ask him about firing multiple black people. Right. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Grim says, and I'm going to use these words because he typed them. I don't know about these nicknames, buddy, but the bigger story is that Booty Tang, unnecessary, and Kapmala, not so bad. I'll let that one slide. Were red diaper babies and now are absolute disappointments to the immortal science of dialectal materialism. I don't know about the nickname Booty Tang, Grim. I think it's going to be a little bit problematic. I think we should find a better one for Buttigieg. Politics Understander says, I wish Sacha Baron Cohen would still do this persona trolling. I would love to see him interview Peter Katmala. Politics Understander says, WFP equals Wealthy Families Party. I mean, I'm not going to knock the organization, but yes, I do think that the dues paying WFP people and the leadership are a little bit more, again, they're not rich or wealthy, but, a little bit more comfortable than some of the other people who are, not in the organization. I mean, they're working. They're working class for sure. So Wealthy Families Party is, come on. But it's a fun little acronym, I guess, if you want to do that. I'm not going to do that. Grim says WFP is lapdogging because Cuomo wants to nuke fusion voting. But it's not going to happen. Because Cuomo doesn't have the ability to do that. So why even... Mark Lee says, I have a feeling since it was ranked choice, Sanders got more first choice votes and Warren got more overall due to people's second choice votes. But here's the thing. We don't know. And until they release it, the vote totals, if they ever do, we won't know. So it's literally all just speculation. But I think a fair speculation, while still speculation, a fair speculation is they won't release it because it makes their endorsement problematic. Grimm says, go back 2 episodes and listen to why it's insane to say there are any white supremacist Bernie bros. Politics Understander says, white men are literally his smallest demographic. Right. Stevie Joe says, Buttigieg is doomed. Man Up says, have you talked about the QAnon rally already? I have not. And I saw QAnon Anonymous did a show on it. And Jared Holt of Shitpost did a show on it. And I felt like it's being covered. I am going to cover it. But let's have a few more QAnon stories come out. And then I'll do a QAnon episode looking at the latest on QAnon, which will bring that rally in. There's just a lot out there that had already done the work from people who were there. I wasn't at the rally. So I'll have them on and we'll discuss. But we'll have more to talk about too. Such as the situation with 8chan still not being around and these people have nowhere to hear from Q. Q has not been heard from for weeks. Ryan says, just like in 2016, the Sanders campaign is being held to higher accountability than any other campaign. Ryan says, WFP, we're fucking pajama boys. Brian says, Warren's old Harvard connections are going to bring the left and center together. Right. Grimm says, WFP has chapters in other states, but I'm not sure they're as prominent as they are in New York. Right. New York is the most prominent Working Families Party chapter, and the others aren't even close. Really. Really? I mean, right. All right, you guys are talking about voting green. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that right now. We're coming to the end of this episode. Let's see a few more good comments here. You guys have great comments, but I'm not going to get into the Green Party debate right now. Yeah. D. Scully, rightists, even when they are in the Democratic Party, do not want to live in a democracy ultimately. They are there to shift the country to an authoritarian system. D. Scully says, Matt, you want to live in a democracy. They don't. It's important to understand what people are actually trying to achieve. And to that, again, I want to add the addendum. They have every right as an organization. They're not a governmental entity. They have every right as an organization to run the show the way they want to run the show. Just like we have a right to not support it and to critique it. We should do it respectfully. And we should do it in good faith. And that's really the point. We should be transparent, open, and honest. As progressives. Kennedy says it's double democracy, Matt. G. Kanganis says, in the end, is not getting the endorsement a huge deal? This is one of those things where people who are in a political bubble it's a big deal to people who are in this political bubble. And as a New Yorker, it does factor into the ground game. Because in New York, working family, especially in New York City, Working Families Party has a decent ground game. However, I would say DSA's rivals it and probably now has the better ground game. So with the DSA endorsement, it might cancel itself out, but instead of canceling each other out, I think Bernie supporters are looking at it as, damn, we could have DSA and WFP working together on the ground. But yeah, the WFP has not a huge, but a decently strong grassroots base in New York City. Again, as you can see, when it came to Hillary versus Bernie in the primaries in New York, didn't fucking matter because Hillary beat Bernie in New York by a sizable margin in New York City specifically. But it's one of those things where it does matter, but it also doesn't matter. If you get what I'm saying. Kennedy says, I don't believe that those harassing tweets actually exist. Well, listen, you could look into the public stuff and look into the stuff that's there. But we don't know what was emailed to them or DM'd to them or the private communications. I'll believe it. I believe it. I'm not going to pretend. I mean, the issue I have is the weaponization of it. Because that really throws this whole thing into another category. Because is the issue, what is the issue about then? Like, is the point of calling it out just to do the political campaign bullshit? Because then that undermines really the whole point, doesn't it? I mean, that's where, I mean, you could have easily called the shit out. Again, easily called the shit out without some of the points made in this letter. And things that leaders of the WFP have said in tweets. That they're only being attacked because of who they are. It's categorically a bad faith argument. There's no proof of that. And that has nothing to do with the harassment. You could be harassed and say, I'm receiving racist and sexist harassment. That's one thing. But they're saying, at the same time, along with that the reason they're being critiqued and people have a problem with it is because of who is in the leadership now, and people think they don't have the right to make those decisions. That's categorically a demonstrably false, bad faith argument. Because, listen, in the end, the harassment isn't part of the argument. The harassment is completely something else. The two issues shouldn't be conflated. Because there should be no one saying, I disagree with the harassment, but that's bullshit if you're making that argument. There's no but to the harassment. But the point is to conflate the two things. And then people defending it are forced to say that. Not even forced. They're free-thinking individuals. They can not do that. But to people who don't think in that way, say but stupidly, and fall into the argument in a way that it shouldn't be being argued. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I mean, I cannot tell you the fucking harassment I saw during Gamergate. And I'm not talking about even the shit I received, because it wasn't even close to what people like Zoe Quinn and other women who spoke out received. But it's something I saw and covered and became a part of. Not part of the harassment, part of that whole fucking shit show. I was deep into it, covering it for the Majority Report at the time. And for myself, because I found it fascinating to watch how the shit was going on. My cat just went into a box. Over here. And all harassment is bad. But to call that the white terror on the left, when what it amounts to is a few abhorrent anonymous shitheads saying horrific, disgusting things. I mean, there's harassment that's the level of Gamergate. And then there's a few trolls trying to stoke fire. And this could be the Gamergate harassment. We don't know. There's harassment for sure. But I mean, it's certainly not there in the public view from what I've seen. So it's all private. And my argument is basically that that's one thing and should be condemned full-throatedly. No addendums, no buts, no ifs, ends. And then completely separately, end of discussion there, whole new issue. There is also a weaponization of bad faith identity politics here. Mark Lee says this is absolutely a 4chan move. Kenny says the thing is it's not harassment if you dunk on someone with a bad take. Right. There are people who think that is harassment, and then there is actual racism and sexism and just straight up harassing people. And there is this weird, there is a subsection of people online who get critiqued and start saying they're being harassed. Which that's not what harassment is. But from this description that they wrote, it sounds like harassment. I mean, the examples they used are clearly harassment. I'm not downplaying what they're receiving. I'm literally saying there's two things being conflated. And it's being conflated in a way that benefits anyone but the left, progressives, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the Working Families Party, and the progressive movement as a whole. Tom says, looks like a raid. But here's the thing. There's not even a raid. From what it looks like, it's... And again, numbers don't matter in condemning this. But numbers matter in saying there is some sort of, overwhelming movement in one presidential candidate's base that's spewing harassment. That's not the case. There are a few trolls and assholes and shitheads who are saying horrendous things, and that is not at all in any way, shape, or form even close to a sizable group of a presidential candidate's base. We're talking millions and millions of people here. Like, the purpose of Gamergate was harassment. The people who said it wasn't harassment and believed the fucking Kool-Aid that it was actually about gaming ethics and gaming journalism, they were in the minority. The people doing the harassment were actually the majority of the movement. That's why that's what Gamergate is. And that's why it was what it was. Literally a dozen assholes, if even that, does not at all speak for a movement that includes millions of people. But there's the conflation there. And at the same time, you condemn full-heartedly those people who are saying this stuff. Hurricane Ravi says, hate on the right is a trillion times worse. Tom says, can we also please stop shitting on candidates for the skin color of their supporters? Talk about policy. Well, I bring it up always in the sense of the hypocrisy of the very people who did that to Bernie supporters all throughout 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 are now supporting the candidate who's supported by a majority of white people. Who sees a majority of their support, from white people. That's how I bring that up. There's nothing that grosses me out more than the people who look at pictures of someone's rally and starts pointing out the fucking people of color in the audience. A, disrespectful to everybody. B, treats people of color as if they're like some sort of like rare Pokemon. Like, it's gross. It is gross to do that. Like, that's a human being you're pointing at and saying, huh. Like, they just, like a majority of them don't even pay attention to this bullshit online, to be quite honest with you. So, Browser says, what tapes? Well, you missed the whole show then. You got to go back and listen when this when the podcast goes up or when the YouTube replay goes up. Misha says, I love Bernie's plan to house the homeless. No one else is talking about actual solutions like he is. We need Bernie. Kenny says, yes, it's got to be Bernie. Midnight Pizza Man says, I'll support Matt instead. Kennedy says, I see more white men defending Elizabeth Warren than Bernie. I literally only see white people support her, and most of them are men. Tom says, I don't personally give a damn if Warren or Sanders voters are brown, black, green, or whatever. Well, it does matter. But you don't point them out in pictures. Like, the base matters. Like, having a diverse coalition matters. But defining individuals in that way, like by pointing out specific people, I mean, that to me is gross. It's gross. Oh, Kenny said, imagine supporting Buttigieg, and Midnight said, I'll support Matt instead. Kenny says, I saw an odd video by a Yang fan today. It was a fucking anime intro that they made about him. Like, it was cringe because it was a Yang stand, but it was also kind of dope. Ryan says, Kent State Confederate Barbie is definitely your claim to fame, Matt. Kenny says, you should do what Michael does and make people pay money to have their comments read. Right, but the audience here isn't big enough yet for that. Eventually. That's the dream, right? Honestly, I would have read one comment today if it was just from Super Chats. My dad says, of your two kids and your fur kid, it's the fur kid who's the noisiest. Yeah, this cat's being a real pain in the ass lately, isn't it? I love him, though. Midnight Pizza Man says, if you're no more than one generation removed from poverty, underpaid, how can you not be poor Bernie? For Bernie. Donkey Show says, I hate this new layout. How long ago did the stream start? It doesn't show. We started at 9, a little bit after 9. The countdown started around 9, and we went live like 9:05. Politics Understander says, I like Mayo Pete. The name, not the person. Right? Mayo Pete is a good nickname for him. Midnight says, Matt, screen cap Pete at podium with disaster in bold print and use it as the pic for the stream's vid. Send me that? What are you talking about? Ed says, do you know the song Baby Shark Buttigieg. Oh, okay. Oh boy. Politics Understander says, LOL, Giuliani is all over the cable news right now, admitting to asking Ukraine to meddle on the election tonight. What? Nicola says, I missed it as always. What tapes? What the F is happening? Not booty. Please tell me they got don't tell me they got booty. Nicola says, I know that's arguably problematic, but I'm gay, so I'm allowed, which I know is also problematic. Okay. Politics on the Senator says, it's about his handling of the police department and his love of firing black people. Oh, God. Mark says, is having the white vote really a disadvantage when the first primaries are in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina? Well, that's another thing, too, right? Kenny says, I was a popular blogger on Tumblr during Gamergate. I had a lot of mud thrown my way. I definitely know what kind of that kind of harassment feels like. Listen, there's without a doubt Sanders supporters who are dicks online. That's true, without a doubt. Like I said, it's in every campaign. But I went through it 100 times already. I'm not going to repeat myself again. Ryan says, I can't believe you don't like Racist Where's Waldo Bernie Rally Edition, Matt. Nicola says, yeah, it's almost a fetishistic thing. They're a commodity fetish to libs. Lewis says, is dressing up in blackface 3 times that there's proof of too much? Right. Oh, man, Justin Trudeau. Oh, my God, buddy. Anonymity. Oh, my God. Oof. It's late, folks. Anonymity says, Brooks made a point about how silly it is a politician of a lesser office like Buttigieg is embroiled in so much scandal. Is it that uncommon for mayors or just because he's put himself under scrutiny? I'll tell you, actually, I think so much more of this sort of scandals and controversy happens on local levels like this. I really do. So much less oversight, so many ways they can get away with it, so much less press on it. I actually agree and disagree with Michael. It's both amazing how much scandal this guy is involved with, and both not surprising based on how much scandal most local politicians are usually involved with. Congressional Baseball says the lesson here is that rich kids get caught doing blackface way more than poor kids. I wonder why. Right. Mark says 39% of the black vote supposedly supports Biden, so I don't put a lot of thought about those kind of polls, right? Congressional says, one of my local community colleges just fired an English professor talking about QAnon during class. I saw this in the news. Amazing. A QAnon professor. Shayna says, mayors are corrupt as fuck. Right. Grim says, Matt is correct. Corruption is up and down the ticket at all times. Wait, whose cat was just posted? Can you just tweet your cat? Oh, Kennedy found a cat on YouTube that looks like Pete Buttigieg. What? What? Alright, I'm not going to waste time looking for it, but I'll look after the show. Alright, folks. That's today's Patreon-only episode of Doomed. I gave you guys a lot of bonus today. So if you aren't already spreading the word about this show, please do so. If you aren't already a subscriber on YouTube, Doom.tv. If you're not already following me on Twitter, @MattBinder. Ladies and gentlemen, see you all next time on Doomed.